Welcome back to Bahamas at Sunrise on the 1st of February 2016, Special Regulation Number 1 of 2016 of the Civil Aviation Department's rules on safety, particularly as they relate to unmanned aircraft systems, commonly referred to as drones, came into effect this morning. We have Attorney Michael Allen. He's an expert on the subject. Michael, welcome to Bahamas at Sunrise.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Let's begin with a definition then of drones. When we talk about drones, so our viewers can have an understanding of what these special regulations actually apply to. So when we talk about drones, what are we talking about?
The regulations actually speak in a technical way to certain type of aircraft. And the phrase that's commonly used to refer to them is unmanned aerial systems. Sometimes they're referred to as remotely piloted aircraft or unmanned aerial vehicles. In one sense, what is being attempted here is to deal with a particular type of aircraft which is without a warm body in the cockpit, which is a rather unique set of circumstances because you actually then do have what amounts to reach, surveillance, and possible intrusion into airspace by an entity or a person that's not physically there. We refer to them as drones, but in many ways the technical definition extends beyond the remote control toy or hobby instrument that can be used for
I was about to ask purposes. You that. When I think of drones, you think of, well, the sort of four blades rolling and these mobile vehicles. And how does that differ, though, from the remote control helicopter or the remote control plane?
In many ways, I think technically they're the same instrument, except that the sophistication and the technology has now driven these vehicles to uses that are beyond just pure recreation. Okay. So that you've got instances where these drones are outfitted with mechanisms for spraying tear gas. In surveillance systems by governments. You've also got them used in, obviously, for surveillance purposes in very useful situations where, for instance, if we have a hurricane and you want to survey the area, then you can actually send your drone with your surveillance system. And they can also be outfitted with weapons. And so the technology is advanced in such a way so that you're dealing with essentially the same type of machinery, but the use and the applications can be far-reaching. Is
this why the government then, in its infinite wisdom, said we need to regulate this?
I think so. The regulation is couched in the context of a need for the Civil Aviation Department to respond to its mandate to ensure the public interest and the safety of the community, particularly in the context of aviation as it's applied in Bahamas. So there's a responsibility in one sense to deal with this. It also has certain, I would assume, national security interests that would need to play out here. And so the government, I think, has moved to bring some measure of control and accountability with the users. And I think it's a framework within which the country can now operate within for the purposes of developing, I think, constructively use of drones.
So how is it sort of regulated? What are some of the features of the regulations?
There's a list of restrictions that are imposed on the use. Well, actually, there are two things that the regulations are doing. One is it's requiring that there be registration, and you must have a certificate of registration.
So you have to let them know you have a drone.
In effect, yes. I mean, if you're going to bring a drone into the country, that won't be released to you until you secure a certificate of registration from the Civil Aviation Department. If you actually do have a drone within the country at the moment, you have until February 29th in order to register that drone. On the registration process, which is going to result in you being granted a certificate of registration, you must agree then to use this drone within certain parameters, and then you have a series of restrictions. The restrictions, some will say, are fairly broad insofar as they may be creating what amounts to, for the island of New Providence, almost a no-fly zone. You can't fly your drone within 5 nautical miles, for instance, of the airport. You have to be under 200 feet. You can't be within 500 feet of a congested or populated area. You can't be within 500 feet of an assembly of 100 persons or more. There's a restriction, I think, of 100 feet within a vehicle or a vessel or a structure, unless you have permission of the owner of that structure or that vehicle. You have to be outside of a restricted zone of 175 feet from a person. So you have a number of restrictions here operating which are designed really to create protected airspace around individuals and around buildings. I think what's critical here, though, is that the regulations provide for permissions to be granted by the Civil Aviation Authority in order to use your drone in a way that's outside the parameters. So there is some opportunity for a development of constructive use of drones, notwithstanding the fact that we've got very broad restrictions, which, as we say, could very likely restrict any sensible use of this equipment on the island of New Providence, certainly.
So we have broad restrictions, and if you want to sort of circumvent those restrictions, you need permission then from the department. Who enforces all of this? Who is the sort of inspectorate or registrar?
Well, you have the Civil Aviation Department, which operates under the portfolio of the Ministry of Transport and Aviation. And within that department, you have something called the Flight Standards Inspectorate. So you actually do have a system or structure within which this is to be regulated, and ultimately I think it's the Director of Civil Aviation. So you do have a mechanism in place, and obviously with anything new there will be hiccups and attempts to debug the system as you look at what's going to be efficient ways to approach Civil Aviation Department, how they respond, who are the warm bodies who are going to be processing the applications. With the regulations, there are challenges. At some point, regulations may mean nothing unless you have some capacity to verify violations, to apprehend intruders, to prosecute. And the simple regulations that have been produced are, in effect, we think, a stopgap measure as the government moves in the direction of seeing to more comprehensive regulations, which will, in a very broad and, how do we say, a significant way, deal with everything that has to do with the use of these pieces of equipment.
All right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us on Bahamas at Sunrise. We certainly appreciate the information. I know our viewers do.
Thank you for having me.
All right, our pleasure. You're watching Bahamas at Sunrise. We'll be back after this.